Ever wonder what really happens to a king's body after it's lowered into the shadows of a royal vault? Not the ceremonial part. I mean the hidden hours, the cold stone, the smell of old lead and older secrets. Henry VIII, the most thunderous monarch England ever produced, didn't exactly slip quietly into eternal rest. There's a moment in this story, you'll see, when a dog shows up at entirely the wrong time and place, and suddenly everything feels, well, uncanny, and a bit too close to some very old prophecies. Anyway, let's take this step by step, because Henry's final journey, from his death on January 28, 1547, to his burial on February 16, became a strange parade of leaking coffins, whispered accusations, and historians fighting over who's telling the truth. Or close enough to it. The sermon that started a legend. To understand the stories that followed Henry to the grave, you almost have to rewind the clock to 1532. Picture Easter Sunday, Greenwich Palace, the air thick with incense and courtly tension. Friar William Peto climbs into the pulpit and, for reasons we'll never fully grasp, decides to give the king a sermon he absolutely won't enjoy. Peto brings up King Ahab from the Bible, the one whose blood was licked up by dogs, remember? And hints, not too subtly, that Henry risks the same fate if he keeps pushing his marriage plans with Anne Boleyn. Now, did Peto actually make that prophecy? Maybe. Maybe Henry heard it privately later. Maybe it's all a dramatized flourish created long after Henry died. The sources don't agree, and that alone makes the whole thing even more enticing. Still, whether or not those words were ever spoken, people remembered them, or thought they did. Memory gets slippery when politics and religion start wrestling in a back room. The king dies, the clock starts ticking. Fast forward to 1547, early morning, Whitehall Palace. Henry VIII, the man who split kingdoms, wives, and occasionally enemies, is dead. The body is embalmed, sealed into a lead coffin, and placed in the presence chamber so courtiers can perform the traditional rituals of grief or whatever passed for grief at Tudor court. But embalming in 16th century England? It wasn't exactly art. More like a set of procedures someone wrote down after watching a more experienced surgeon once. They did their best, removed organs, added spices, sealed the corpse, but 2.5 weeks later, the king had to be transported to Windsor. And that's when the road got bumpy. Literally, the Syon Abbey incident. On February 14th, Henry's coffin is loaded onto a chariot. The procession moves slowly, deliberately, almost theatrically, until darkness forces the group to stop at Syon Abbey. Now, Syon is already a place dripping with symbolism. Henry dissolved the abbey years earlier. He also imprisoned Catherine Howard there before her execution. So the idea of the dead king spending a night inside those walls, it's almost too on the nose. At some point during the night, or maybe early morning, something goes wrong. The lead coffin splits. Maybe the road jolted it. Maybe the corpse was already unstable. Maybe the workmanship wasn't great. No one left us a clear engineering report. But what was left is far more memorable. Because according to Nicholas Harpsfield, when attendants came to repair the coffin, they found a dog. A dog inside a sacred space, inside a room holding the body of a king. And it was licking the fluid leaking from Henry's coffin. Harpsfield claims the attendants barely managed to drive the animal away, and immediately people remembered Peto's sermon from 1532. Prophecy fulfilled, right? Well, maybe. Depends which historian you believe. And depends how much you trust a story told decades after the event. Another version of the same tale. Agnes Strickland, writing in the mid-1800s, mentions a nearly identical story but claims she's quoting a manuscript from the Sloane collection. Same scene, same dog, different witness names. Her version adds a small but chilling detail. The pavement was slick with Henry's blood, or what they believed was blood. No one has found her manuscript since, which is maddening and tantalizing, and exactly the type of thing that keeps historians awake at night, muttering, "Come on, it had to exist, right? Can we trust any of this?" This is where, honestly, the whole story gets messy. Harpsfield was a Catholic writing during Mary I's reign, deeply biased against Henry's religious reforms. perfect motivation to craft a juicy tale showing that God punished the king in death. His work wasn't published until 1878, long after many chances for the manuscript to be copied, recopied, and accidentally improved. Strickland might have had access to a different source, or she might have been repeating a rumor polished into something that looked official. Still, here's the thing. For the prophecy and the dog story to become so persistent, something must have happened at Syon. People rarely invent scandals that never had even a kernel of truth. And a leaking coffin? Very believable. Embalming failures? Absolutely believable. A stray dog? More possible than anyone wants to admit. Whether the prophecy was real is another matter. And honestly, we may never know. Did Henry VIII's body explode? Now, here's the question that gets repeated in documentaries and pub conversations. Did Henry VIII's body actually explode in his coffin? Short answer, maybe. Longer answer, there's no direct evidence because no one opened the coffin at Syon to inspect the body. But the symptoms, leakage, ruptured seams, the involvement of embalmers, suggest something unpleasant was happening inside that lead shell. Gases build, pressure rises, lead isn't flexible. And Henry, by his final years, was a man of considerable size. Embalming helped, sure, but Tudor embalming wasn't exactly NASA-level precision. And history gives us comparisons. William the Conqueror's corpse allegedly burst in 1087 during the funeral itself. The chronicler describes a scene so foul that priests fled the church. Henry I, dead in 1135, leaked black fluid continuously despite preservation attempts. If it happened to them, Henry VIII wasn't immune. But we can't say for certain. The coffin cracked, that much seems likely. Whether the body ruptured inside, that's a mystery still sitting under centuries of dust. The final resting place. On February 16th, Henry was laid to rest beside Jane Seymour in St. George's Chapel. Centuries later, in 1813, workers accidentally opened the vault. The Prince Regent saw Henry's coffin, smashed inward at the middle, with a large opening that exposed the skeleton. A second opening in 1888 confirmed it. The inner lead coffin was torn open at the top, wooden components collapsed across the bones, the skull visible among the debris. Jane's coffin? Perfectly intact. So what really happened? Poor construction? Damage during Charles I's chaotic interment in 1649? Natural decay? Or something more dramatic? Even now, no one can say with absolute certainty. A final thought. History leaves its threads loose on purpose, I think. Forces us to keep tugging at them. So here's the real question. The one that lingers once you push past the rumors and the cracked lead and the dog wandering through a ruined abbey. If Henry VIII, a king who commanded armies, wives, and the very soul of England, couldn't control his own body after death, what does that say about the legacy he believed he'd forged? And what, honestly, do you think happened inside that coffin?